We've been sharing a lot of news details with you about our friends at High Desert Meat Processing, right here in Twin Falls. Actually, I've had a lot of people stop me on the street, and they've told me that they're customers and that everything that we tell you about High Desert Meat Processing is spot on. Where they process one animal at a time, what you bring in is what you get back. Darren Van Horn, the owner of High Desert Meat Processing, he's been doing this for nearly 35 years. Visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook, and you can see some of those reviews from people who have nothing but great things to say about the business. Give High Desert Meat Processing a telephone call for all of your wild game and your domestic processing needs as well. 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. Specialty meats, jerky, pepperoni, salami, summer sausage, kielbasa, breakfast sausage, brats, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and much more. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers as well as their programs to ensure quality meat. The number once more, 734-9949. We have a caller joining us immediately out of the break. It's 9:34. I've got 28. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Hi, Bill. I just thought of something else. It took a long time for the Clintons to release their Rose Law Firm files. They couldn't find them for a long time. So why should it be a surprise that they can't find her emails?
She won't even release details. Thanks for the call. She won't release details about her speaking fees. Now, she apparently, it's the transcripts, she apparently spoke to Goldman Sachs and got nearly $750,000 for the speech. I mean, for crying out loud, folks, she's saying this has no impact on. Meanwhile, people keep saying, well, Ted Cruz's wife worked for Goldman Sachs. Well, Goldman Sachs has contributed more than twice as much to Hillary's campaign as they have to Ted Cruz's campaign. And she keeps saying, no, but there's no quid pro quo. Well, they don't give you money because they like you, Hillary, or they think you're pretty. They give you the money because they expect you're going to do their bidding. 9:36. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.
So over the weekend, I did a little bit of studying, not much, but America's in trouble. And I keep hearing statistics that say people, more than the majority of, super majority of people, believe that government is the biggest problem we face right now. We can do something about it. It's called a convention of states, and everybody needs to get a hold of their state representative and tell them we want a convention of states, and we want to hold the federal government's feet to the fire. We want to force them to start abiding by the Constitution and start taking control of our government. We are supposed to be in control of our federal government. It's not supposed to be the other way around, and everybody intuitively knows this. Otherwise, you wouldn't hear these statistics that people believe the federal government is the biggest problem.
I read over the weekend myself that there's a momentum building for this convention of states in Boise, as well as I think in Carson City and some other places here in the West. But the only concern is, I remember years ago, I had a conversation with a legislator, and I said, well, would you be partaking in it, or could we send someone else? He said, I think it would be important that I be there. So if you send the same dang people, you might get the same results. These are the people who messed it up.
That's the thing, though. It has to be your representative, the Idaho representative. So your local representative, well, local-ish, we all have our, you know what I'm saying? We have to hold the local people accountable. They have to be the ones to go. It's not a federal senator issue.
But do you fear that they could start rewriting the Constitution and taking away certain liberties?
But the problem is they can't do it against the will of the people, because the people vote them into office all the time. It's not like they hold so much power that they can just run away. Everybody keeps talking about a runaway convention, a constitutional convention, and we need to stop doing that, because these people are local people. They have to eat with you at the diner. They don't spend all their time in Washington. That's what's so great about it. You get local people standing up to the big government. The problem is you got to get 2/3 of the states to do it, but that shouldn't be a problem. If 70-80% of Americans believe the federal government's the problem, then do something about it. Stop just complaining.
But every 2 years we have an opportunity to send Mike Simpson back to Washington or not. And how do you know you could trust any of these people if I hear all the time people don't feel they can trust him?
I guess you're just not hearing me. It's not the guys that go to Washington necessarily.
So it would be our
local
representatives like Jim Patrick and people here in the.
Exactly. That's who does it. It's a state. Each state does it.
Okay,
our state representatives, not the federal representatives.
If we in that way, you as you pointed out, you have much closer. Thank you for the call. Much closer contact with them. Sometimes, I've gone down to La Casita and I've had lunch with some of our state representatives just because they're available and they're willing to talk to you and share some ideas. Maybe that is the approach to take. Or we elect a whole new slate of people that we send off. 30. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. John Kasich actually is promoting the whole notion of this convention. It might be the only idea that he's thrown out there that establishment media doesn't pay any attention to that idea. They just tell you, isn't he pretty? And he's really nice. And he's kind of liberal at times. So maybe all of you Republicans should vote for him. In fact, let us instruct you on who to vote for. We here at the media, we're curing cancer and we're building rockets to the moon and Mars. We know everything. You don't. So follow our advice. 20 minutes now from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. Look, more of your telephone calls coming up in just a few minutes right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Few quick headlines that we haven't gotten to yet this morning that I'd like to share, and I will get to my telephone callers in just a moment. Bear with me. I will not leave you on hanging on hold long, so stay there. I have just a couple of things I wanted to mention, though, before we wrap up the program today. We got about 15 minutes to go. WashingtonExaminer.com. Did you hear this? If you listened to the debate the other night with the Republicans, they were asked, some of them were asked, if we have a draft, should we draft women? And most of these guys said, yeah, it'd be a great idea. I have a friend, he served in the Marine Corps in the first Gulf War, Jim de Blasi. Jim's best friend, actually, serving with him, they were both like first lieutenants at the time, was G. Gordon Liddy's son. But Jim used to tell me, we don't need women in combat because it's like a wild football team ready to go out and charge and do the job, but you put women in there and everyone wants to throw it on a coat and say, don't step in that mud puddle. Ted Cruz is saying that this is just nuts to contemplate drafting women. Amen. You may not like him for some reasons, but that's a pretty common sense approach. You're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310, KLIX.
Hi. I just want to comment on what the previous caller talked about.
Yes.
And there's such a push for having basically, it's the Article 5 convention. You can call it what you want, but it's the only other way to amend the Constitution. And really, I have been educating myself on the dangers of an Article 5 convention, and there is absolutely no guarantee of the Constitution being safeguarded in any way if that is ever called, and we are dangerously close to that happening. And if you do want to get more information, there's this amazing video on YouTube, Article 5 Convention, What They Are Not Telling You. And so if people out there want to know for themselves why this would be a terrible idea, that's an excellent, it takes about 45 minutes. And I just went, whoa. And so I told my local reps, please do not vote for a call to have a convention because it could be disastrous. All we have to do is look at history, and what they did was trying to amend the Articles of Confederation, and we ended up with a completely new government, and I think that would be the case. And, of course, we don't want that now with the case of the people, the quality of people in government, and just so many forces. Don't you agree?
Well, and I thank you much for the telephone call and chiming in. And I think that there are legitimate concerns about this. The people who put that initial Constitution together, and James Madison was behind most of it. I had a friend of mine the other day from high school try to tell me it was Jefferson. He started blathering on about separation of church and state in an online conversation. And I said, there is no such phrase in the Constitution. I said, that's actually from a private letter from Thomas Jefferson to a Baptist minister. And he wrote back, he said, well, Jefferson would know as the author of the Constitution. I wrote back and said, no, he was the author of the Declaration of Independence to some degree on a committee. but the Constitution is primarily James Madison's work. So we're dealing with people like that who really aren't quite sure anyway what's in the document or who even authored it. I believe that the reason they put this Constitution together and that they made the bar so high for amending it is because they didn't think amending it should be easy. But they did believe that if you just followed it, and if you had courts that would actually enforce the following of it, and that means getting rid of all of the liberal appointees to the federal bench, people who could actually understand that, they're not there to change America in a sense, to bend it to the latest fashion or style, that we are to adhere to that original document. Then gridlock. I mean, they foresaw gridlock in the nation's capital, and that was what they intended, because they didn't want people constantly making new laws and regulations and amending the Constitution just on a whim. 948. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. On the other hand, if we can't get a handle on this, we will be having a convention at some point, or the other option after anarchy is the military coming in and imposing its own will on the country and restoring order, which I don't think we want either. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Hey, good morning, Bill. I want to go back to something that you said just a few minutes ago based on a caller, and it has to do with selective service. I am a former infantry officer, served during the early parts of 1970 into the middle of that decade. And what was said at the time when this subject came up, women in the military, women in the combat arms, was that the people of the United States would never tolerate it. So it was a silly thing for Congress at that time to even be talking about. This was the chatter among senior and junior military officers. Well, it has now come to pass. Women are in every level of the military, including the combat arms. And from my perspective, first of all, the question is not women being drafted. The question that has been raised is, should women sign up in the selective service as all young men are required to do? My belief is absolutely they should, because now women are qualified for all levels of service, just the same as our young men. This, however, may cause the people of the United States to pause and consider what the Secretary of Defense has pushed in the last couple of years. This is really his idea. This is not generally the accepted response or the accepted desire of senior military officers across the board. And so I say, yes, have young women sign up for selective service just as we ask young men to do.
I don't want them in combat roles. I could see someone being drafted and being put in a role where, and a lot of this is now push button, right? You're sitting, perhaps you can run a drone from a remote location. You can be in Tampa. You can be actually running a drone halfway around the world. But the problem, I think, is my friend Jim de Blasi said to me, was that you bring women into the equation of a combat unit, and it immediately changes. You're looking out for them when you should be thinking about your job ahead of you, and that's trying to ensure that you kill the other guy before he kills you.
Bill, the horse is already out of the barn.
We were promised in the late 1970s, though. Units. Remember in the Carter years when we started making a lot of these changes, we were told, well, they won't end up in combat. It's always that's what happens with these people. They take a little and say, that's all we want, and then they come back and they say, well, actually, it's like civil unions. That's all we want. And then it became, well, we want marriage. They called it marriage equality. It's a different story, but it's analogous to that. I don't think that it's going to help our combat readiness.
But that subject has already been dealt with. They're already in combat units. There are already women in the infantry. There are already women flying.
What is though?
There are already women serving on Navy men of war.
I just had a friend who mentioned this 2 weeks ago to me. He's retired after 21 years in the Navy, and he said the problem was they used to come back to port and they'd have all of these pregnant women on board, and it does have an impact. And if your goal is to win wars instead of peacekeeping or nation building or building schools and hospitals, I don't think it's the optimum, and I think that we're going down a slippery slope here.
Bill, there's no question. Please, I just want to refer back. I am a former infantry officer, a leader of men. If I were in the service now, I would be expected to be a leader of men and women,
Sure.
even though I'm wearing cross rifles on my lapels. That's the issue.
Here's the question. Would you say we're already there? Has it made
Yes.
things better, or has it made things worse?
I think that the potential is worse. However, the only way to turn this around is for the people of the United States, the fathers and mothers in the United States, to say, if we must fight wars, we want the actual combat conducted by our young men. We don't want to send them, but if we must, it must be young men. There has been no outrage. There has been no one speaking against this silly, stupid Secretary of Defense that we have.
Right, because people are too involved watching reality TV and.
Well, when the body bags begin coming home, and I've heard this said before, when the body bags begin coming home, and there are an equal number of our precious girls or young women in those bags, then Americans will maybe begin to rethink this issue. However, that may already have been waiting too long.
Well, once it's out, thank you much for the telephone call. Once we sometimes have a policy in place, it's awfully difficult to turn it around. It's like giving benefits to people. The government creates a benefit, and as we said earlier, it doesn't necessarily ponder how it's going to be paid for. And then when somebody down the road would say, well, we can't afford it. Well, let's say tomorrow they came along and said, sorry, Social Security's over with. Medicare and Medicaid are over with. Obamacare is over with. There would be people rioting in the streets. And yet we're headed that direction. I mean, the day of reckoning is coming just because of what we can afford or we can't afford. And as he just pointed out, our caller pointed out, my little girl is the most precious thing in the world. And I don't want to see his son come home in a body bag either. But I'd prefer my little girl to eventually someday give me grandchildren and be a great loving mother. I just can't fathom sending her out into a war zone. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 30. And we have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill. I'm a former infantry non-commissioned officer, 21 years in the service. I led both men and women during my time frame there. And it's just kind of funny the way this is all working out. I had an experience this weekend. My daughter-in-law is a young lady, and she's had been on the liberal side, and she was all gung-ho about women being allowed to serve where they wanted. When I mentioned that, it sounds like a bill's been introduced that means you'll have to register for selective service, her demeanor completely switched. She's like, what do you mean? I said, you're going to sign up for the draft. That's, you guys got it. You guys got equality. Not one more thing was mentioned the entire weekend. So that one observation there is just something. The previous gentleman that called, I think he may have something. When people start realizing the ramifications of this, there's going to be a little bit of blowback. I'm not sure if there's going to be enough, and the only thing about women in the infantry, my son, he was a great football player in high school, fantastic football player, but he's 5'8" and weighs $120. While he has the ability, genetics were not there to allow him to play in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but my 225-pound, body, and 125 or 150-pound woman being able to pick me up and carry me off the battlefield when I'm hurt or wounded or whatever else. It's been studied, it's been looked at, and I'm sorry, but it's just not there. They don't have the same capabilities. Now, granted, There may be a small percentage of the population that does have that ability. It's an extremely small percentage.
Right. Right.
When we open up the doors to them all we're doing is reducing the combat effectiveness of that unit, and that's going to lead to more casualties, period.
Hey, thank you much for the telephone call. And, the analogy about your son and not making the NFL because of his size, I think is very, very true. And we look at this, and I've read what's happened. They've had to reduce standards in some units when they're trying to bring women into the Army Rangers and the like, because the politically correct say, oh, well, we should have every job open to all of these people. Well, I couldn't play in the NFL because I was slow. Number two, I got terrible vision. So that ended my football playing days in high school. That's the breaks. I had to find something else to do with my life. Can't get everything you want. It's 9:58. Bill Colley with you saying, hey, have a great day. God willing, and the creek don't rise. I'm back here tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Rush Limbaugh following Fox News. Also wanted to mention, we're going to have a guest in from Trip Family Medicine twice this week. We're going to do our usual Wednesday program. We'll take a medical issue and break that down for you right here on the air on Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Trip Family Medicine located on Fillmore Street directly across from the main post office right here in Twin Falls. But later in the week, the doctor is going to join us Friday morning for a special segment on the Zika virus, what you should know, and is it really as hazardous as we're now hearing in the media? Is it as big a threat as the World Health Organization claims it is? So details on that coming up a little bit later. We'll see someone from the office twice this week. Have a great day.